July 1944, Tokyo. A telegram arrives at Imperial headquarters. The room goes silent. What happens next ends Japan's hope of victory. One admiral stares at the wall without speaking. Another quietly says the words that could get him executed. And the third, his reaction makes them realize Tokyo itself will burn. But here's what nobody expected. The emperor's response changes the government overnight. Because when they heard about Saipan, Japanese high command knew three terrifying truths. And the first one, it meant their children were now in the crosshairs. Before we dive into this story, subscribe and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. Every view helps bring more stories like this to life. Imperial General Headquarters, Tokyo, mid-July 1944. The conference room smells of tobacco and sweat. Maps cover the walls. Thin red strings still connect Tokyo to distant islands that are already gone. A messenger from the communications office steps inside. He bows, hands a telegram to the senior staff officer. The officer reads it once. His hands tighten on the paper. He reads it again. When he speaks, his voice cracks. Saipan has been lost. All organized resistance has ceased. The room goes completely still. Admirals in white summer uniforms, army generals in dark green, staff officers with armfuls of reports. Everyone stops moving. The silence stretches. 5 seconds. 10. 20. Long enough for cigarette ash to collapse onto the floor. Nobody bends to clean it. These are Japan's most powerful men, generals who conquered Manchuria and Southeast Asia. Admirals who once ruled the Pacific, men trained since childhood to hide emotion, to show nothing. But today is different. Because everyone in this room understands what Saipan means. 1,500 miles. That's the number that breaks the silence. Vice Admiral Miwa finally speaks. His voice is barely above a whisper. The Marianas. They can reach Tokyo now. Every officer in the room knows what he means. The Boeing B-29 Superfortress. America's new super bomber. The most advanced aircraft in the world. Range 1,600 miles, fully loaded with bombs. Do the math. Saipan to Tokyo, 1,500 miles. B-29 range, 1,600 miles. For the first time in the war, Japan's home islands are vulnerable to sustained bombing. Every city, every factory, every civilian neighborhood. An army staff officer speaks next, his voice hollow. Our families. He stops. Cannot finish the sentence. These are military men. They've sent hundreds of thousands to die without hesitation. But this is different. Their own children are now in the crosshairs. On the wall map, someone slowly removes the pin representing Saipan. Another officer picks up a pencil and draws a circle, roughly 1,500 miles wide, centered on the Mariana Islands. Inside that circle sits Tokyo. General Anami does something unthinkable. He stands up abruptly, his chair scrapes backward against the floor. Without asking permission, without being dismissed, he walks toward the door. In the Japanese military, this is shocking. You don't leave a command meeting. You don't show emotion. You especially don't walk out on your superior officers. But Anami doesn't care anymore. The other officers watch him go. Nobody stops him. Nobody says a word. Then Admiral Nagano does something equally unprecedented. He places both hands over his face. His shoulders shake slightly. A Japanese admiral, showing emotion in front of fellow officers. The men around the table look away. Some stare at the map. Others study their hands. Finally, someone has to say it. The most senior officer in the room, an army general, turns from the window where he's been standing. His face looks gray, aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Gentlemen, he says slowly, we must face the truth now. The truth. That word hangs in the air. For 3 years, Japanese high command has been speaking of victory, decisive battles, sure triumph. They've told their soldiers, their people, themselves, that Japan would prevail. But what truth is he talking about? The inner defensive perimeter is broken. Another officer says it even more bluntly. Quiet, but clear enough for everyone to hear. We can no longer win this war. 5 words that could mean execution for defeatism. The other officers sit frozen. Some nod slowly, others close their eyes. But nobody argues, because the numbers don't lie, and they all know the numbers. Japan's navy shattered at the Philippine Sea. Carriers sunk, best pilots dead. Oil supplies nearly exhausted. And America is just getting started. A staff officer pulls out an intelligence report, numbers from their operatives. The figures are staggering. America is building one aircraft carrier every month, one heavy bomber every hour, one fighter plane every 5 minutes. How do we fight this? Someone whispers. The answer sits unspoken in the room. They can't. Japan cannot match American industrial power. It's like trying to fight the ocean itself with a bucket. But here's what makes it worse. Here's what makes Saipan the breaking point that nobody saw coming. The reports filter in throughout the day. Details from Saipan, what happened during the final days of fighting, what the civilians did when American forces closed in. An admiral reads a dispatch out loud. His voice cracks. Thousands of Japanese civilians, families, mothers, fathers, children. They walked to the northern cliffs overlooking the ocean, and they jumped. Entire families holding hands, leaping into the sea, choosing death over capture. Why? Because for years, Japanese propaganda told them that Americans were monsters, that capture meant torture and death, that suicide was the honorable choice. The generals sit in stunned silence. This is what their own propaganda created, their own words, coming back like a curse. One officer tries to speak. If this happens on Saipan, when the Americans reach the home islands, he cannot finish the sentence. Nobody needs him to. They're all imagining the same thing. Tens of millions of Japanese civilians facing the same choice, mass death rather than surrender. This is the story of what happened in that room and in the rooms that followed. What Japan's leaders said when they learned Saipan had fallen. What they did in the days after. How the government collapsed. How they began preparing for the bombers they knew were coming. Because on July 9th, 1944, in that silent conference room in Tokyo, Japan's high command already understood something the world wouldn't know for another year. The war was lost. Everything that followed, the fire bombings, the atomic bombs, the final surrender, was just the working out of a truth they grasped the moment Saipan fell. So what exactly did the Japanese high command say when they heard Saipan was captured by the United States? Not just one dramatic line, but a series of grim realizations. Our war was lost with the loss of Saipan. When we lost Saipan, hell was on us. The home islands will be bombed. We can no longer hope to win, only to decide how we will lose. The rest of the war would only prove that on the day Saipan fell, they already knew the truth. To understand why that room went silent, you have to go back. Back to when Japan's military planners still believed they could win. 2 years earlier, 1942, Tokyo was confident. Japan had conquered an empire stretching from Burma to the Central Pacific. Millions of square miles. Hundreds of millions of people under Japanese control. But the military planners knew they couldn't hold everything forever. America's industrial power was too great, so they designed something clever. A defensive line, a ring of fortified islands forming an outer perimeter around Japan's conquest. They called it the Absolute National Defense Zone. The word absolute wasn't an accident. It meant unbreakable, invincible. The line where American advances would stop. The Marianas, Saipan, Tinian, Guam, they sat right in the middle of that line. Fortified, garrisoned, protected by the combined fleet. Government propaganda promised the Japanese people that this line would hold. Posters showed Japanese soldiers standing firm on tropical islands while American ships burned in the distance. Radio broadcasts assured families that their sons defending these islands were creating an impenetrable wall. Absolute victory, the newspapers proclaimed. The Americans will break themselves against our defenses. But that was before Midway, before Guadalcanal, before the Philippine Sea. Now, in July 1944, sitting in that conference room, the officers know the truth. The invincible line is broken, not just cracked, not just weakened, shattered completely. Quick reminder before we start, subscribing helps the channel grow and keeps more stories coming your way. American forces punched through Saipan in less than a month of fighting. 30,000 Japanese soldiers dead or scattered. The naval battle meant to save them ended in catastrophe. Japan's carrier force, what little remained after Midway, destroyed. A young staff officer stands at the map. He's holding the pin that represented Saipan. For a long moment, he just stares at it. Then he pulls it out. The hole it leaves looks impossibly small for something so catastrophic. Another officer marks the American advance with blue pins. The Gilberts, the Marshalls, now the Marianas. The line of blue moves steadily westward, month by month, island by island, toward Tokyo. An army general breaks the silence. Perhaps we can establish a new defensive line, closer to the home islands. The words sound hollow even as he speaks them. A Navy officer shakes his head slowly. With what fleet? Our carriers are gone. Our experienced pilots are dead. The Americans control the sea. The debate continues, but it's mechanical, going through the motions. Some officers argue that the loss might be temporary, that Japan can rebuild, reorganize, establish new defensive positions, but their voices lack conviction. Most sit quietly, running calculations in their heads, numbers that don't work no matter how you arrange them. In a smaller office down the hall, Colonel Sei Matsutani of the War Guidance Section sits at his desk. He's been ordered to write an assessment, an honest one, for internal use only. His pen moves slowly across the paper. The loss of Saipan, he writes, has fundamentally altered the strategic situation. He pauses, crosses out fundamentally altered, and writes instead, has destroyed all realistic hope of victory. The words look almost treasonous on paper. Defeatist. The kind of thing that gets officers arrested. But Matsutani is writing for the inner circle, the men who need to know the truth, not the propaganda. He continues writing, each sentence more damning than the last. The absolute national defense zone no longer exists. The home islands are now exposed to direct air attack. Our industrial capacity cannot match American production. Our naval forces cannot contest American control of the Pacific. He sets down his pen, reads what he's written, then he adds one final line. We must consider how to end this conflict before Japan itself is destroyed. The report will circulate quietly among senior officers. Most will read it and say nothing. A few will nod in private agreement. None will contradict it. Back in the main conference room, Vice Admiral Shigeyoshi Miwa stands near the window. He's watching the street below, civilians going about their daily lives, shopping, working, completely unaware of what just happened to their country's defensive strategy. Another admiral approaches him, stands beside him at the window. What do we tell them? The second admiral asks quietly. Miwa doesn't answer immediately, just keeps watching the street. Finally, barely above a whisper, he says, Our war was lost with the loss of Saipan. The other admiral closes his eyes, says nothing, because there's nothing to say. They both know Miwa is right. The defensive perimeter that was supposed to protect Japan has failed. The strategy that was supposed to wear down American will has collapsed. The fleet that was supposed to defend the empire is at the bottom of the Pacific, and now Tokyo is within range of American bombers. Word reaches the imperial palace faster than expected. The emperor's closest advisors gather in quiet rooms, speaking in careful, coded language. They're not military men. They're court officials, elder statesmen, political advisors, but they understand what Saipan means. If the military cannot defend the outer islands, one advisor says slowly, then perhaps we must consider other options. Nobody says the word peace. Not yet. Too dangerous. But they're all thinking about political survival, about the imperial system itself, about what happens if American bombs start falling on Tokyo and the military still insists on fighting. The people will lose faith. Another advisor warns, if their homes burn and we still speak of victory, they will stop believing. One of the elder statesmen, a former prime minister, speaks with unusual bluntness. The military has failed. Saipan proves it. If they cannot win, they must at least preserve the nation, preserve the throne. The others nod slowly. A decision hasn't been made. Not yet, but the conversation has shifted. For the first time, people close to the emperor are asking not how to win, but how to survive. The broken pin lies on the table where the staff officer left it. Such a small thing, a piece of colored metal, but it represents 30,000 dead soldiers, thousands of dead civilians, an entire strategy in ruins, and 1,500 miles of open ocean between Saipan and Tokyo. The distance American bombers will soon be crossing. The Imperial Palace. Late afternoon, July 1944. Emperor Hirohito sits in his private study. The room is simple, almost austere. Books line the walls. Scientific journals, marine biology texts, maps. Outside the door, his advisors wait. They've requested an urgent audience. The word urgent is rarely used in palace protocol. Its presence alone tells Hirohito something has gone terribly wrong. He smooths his uniform, takes a breath. His face shows nothing. Come in. 3 men enter, elder statesmen, the Jushin, former prime ministers, senior court officials, men who've served the throne for decades. They bow. Hirohito acknowledges them with a slight nod. The most senior advisor speaks first. His voice is careful, measured. Your Majesty, we must inform you of developments in the Pacific. The situation on Saipan has deteriorated. Deteriorated. A palace word. It means disaster. Hirohito's expression doesn't change. Go on. The island has fallen, Your Majesty. All organized resistance has ceased. The garrison has been lost. Silence fills the room. Hirohito already knew this was coming. He had seen the reports, watched the naval battle unfold on paper, but hearing it stated officially makes it real. He asked the question he already knows the answer to. Can the island be retaken? The advisors exchange glances. The Navy, one begins carefully, suffered significant losses in the recent engagement. Our carrier forces are no longer adequate for such an operation. Another palace phrase, no longer adequate, means destroyed. Hirohito stands, walks to the window, his back to the advisors. What does this mean for the home islands? The advisors know this question was coming. They've prepared their answer carefully. Your Majesty, the Mariana Islands sit approximately 1,500 miles from Tokyo. American heavy bombers, the B-29 Superfortress, have an operational range of 1,600 miles. They let that sink in. Hirohito doesn't turn around, doesn't speak, but his hands tighten slightly behind his back. He's doing the math. The terrible, simple arithmetic. 1,500 miles, 1,600 mile range. For the first time since the war began, Tokyo is vulnerable. Not theoretically, actually vulnerable. His mind races through the implications. The palace could be bombed. The shrines could be destroyed. The imperial line, unbroken for 26 centuries, could end in fire. But it's not just about the palace. He thinks of Tokyo's neighborhoods, wooden houses packed tightly together, families sleeping on tatami mats, children. What will happen to them when the bombers come? An advisor speaks quietly. Your Majesty, we believe the Americans will begin air operations from the Marianas within months, perhaps weeks. Hirohito finally turns to face them. And our ability to defend against such attacks, the advisors look down. One clears his throat. Limited, Your Majesty. Our air defense capabilities are insufficient for sustained bombing campaigns. There's that word again. Insufficient. Palace language for hopeless. Hirohito sits back down. His face remains composed, but inside, a question is forming. One he cannot ask directly. Not yet. Can we still win this war? He's been asking himself this question for months now, ever since Midway, since Guadalcanal, since the endless string of defeats disguised in military reports as strategic withdrawals. But Saipan is different. Saipan means American bombers over Japanese cities. It means the war has come home. More importantly, it means the Kokutai, the imperial system itself, is at risk. If Tokyo burns, if civilians die by the thousands, if the military continues to promise victory while delivering only ashes, what happens to faith in the throne? What happens to the imperial system that Hirohito is sworn to preserve? An advisor speaks again, choosing his words with extreme care. Your Majesty, some of us believe it may be prudent to consider alternative approaches to the current situation. Alternative approaches. Code for peace negotiations. But Hirohito isn't ready for that. Not yet. Peace now would mean unconditional surrender. Occupation. Possibly the end of the imperial system. War crimes trials. Humiliation. No. If peace comes, it must come from a position of strength, or at least not from complete weakness. First, changes must be made. Hirohito's voice is quiet but clear. General Tojo has held the position of prime minister for how long now? Nearly 3 years, Your Majesty. And in that time, We have lost how many territories? The advisors don't answer. The list is too long. Hirohito continues. The general assured me that the Marianas would be held, that the defensive line was secure, that the Navy would protect our strategic positions. He pauses, lets the failures hang in the air. It appears his assessments were incorrect. This is as close as an emperor comes to saying, I've lost confidence in him. The advisors understand immediately. Tojo's time is finished. One advisor bows. We will convey your majesty's concerns to the appropriate officials. Translation will start the process of removing Tojo from power. But Hirohito isn't finished. However, he says carefully, we must be cautious about any precipitous changes in policy. The military situation, while difficult, may still permit favorable resolution. The advisors nod. They understand this too. Yes, Tojo must go. But no, Japan will not seek peace. Not yet. Not until circumstances improve. If they ever do. In another room of the palace, cabinet ministers gather. The newspapers want a statement about Saipan. Radio broadcasts need official guidance. The public knows something has happened. What do we tell them? A minister asks. The debate grows heated. One faction argues for honesty. Tell them the island fell. Prepare them for what comes next. Let them evacuate the cities. Another faction warns that honesty will cause panic. Defeatism. Collapse of morale. A compromise emerges, as compromises always do in such meetings. We acknowledge the loss, but frame it as temporary. We speak of regrouping, of determination, of inevitable victory. We do not mention the bombers. We do not mention that Tokyo is now in range. We do not mention that military planners are already calculating how many civilians will die when the B-29s come. Let the people have a few more weeks of not knowing, a few more weeks of sleeping peacefully in their wooden houses before the fire comes. Hirohito sits alone in his study after the advisors leave. He opens a drawer, pulls out a map of the Pacific, traces a line from Saipan to Tokyo with his finger, 1,500 miles. Such a small distance on a map, but it represents everything. The end of the defensive strategy, the beginning of the bombing campaign, the slow collapse of Japan's ability to fight, and possibly, though he cannot yet admit it fully, the end of the war itself, but not yet. First, Tojo must go. Then, perhaps, Japan can find a way to end this with honor, if such a thing is still possible, if there's still time before the bombers arrive. He closes the map, returns it to the drawer. Tomorrow, he'll meet with Tojo one final time. Tonight, he listens to the city outside his window. Tokyo, alive and unaware, still untouched by war, still safe for now. The reports start arriving before noon. Short telegrams at first, fragmentary. Communications from Saipan cut off mid-sentence as American forces overran the last positions. But these new messages come from different sources. Naval vessels offshore, reconnaissance aircraft, even intercepted American transmissions. They all say the same thing. Something terrible happened on the northern cliffs. A communications officer enters the conference room. His face is pale. He hands a telegram to Admiral Toyota without speaking. Toyota reads it silently. His jaw tightens. He looks up at the other officers. There are reports, he begins, his voice steady concerning civilian casualties on Saipan. He continues reading. Observers report large numbers of civilians moving toward the northern coastline. Families, women with children. They walk to the cliffs overlooking the sea. He pauses, takes a breath, and they jumped. The room goes quiet again. That particular silence they're becoming familiar with. How many? Someone asks. Toyota looks back at the telegram. Hundreds. Possibly more than 1,000. An army officer shakes his head. That cannot be accurate. Civilians wouldn't. Another telegram arrives. Then another. Each one confirms the same story. Different observers, different locations along the cliffs, all reporting the same horrifying pattern. By afternoon, more detailed reports filter through. A naval officer begins reading one aloud. His voice is mechanical at first, trying to maintain professional distance. Observation from destroyer Shikinami. He reads, Northern cliffs of Saipan, approximately 0800 hours. Groups of civilians, Estimated 50 to 100 individuals observed approaching cliff edge. Families holding hands. Parents carrying small children. His voice wavers slightly. Many jump together. Bodies observed in the water below. American small craft attempting rescue operations, but most civilians refused assistance. Some attacked American sailors attempting to save them. He sets down the report, cannot continue. Another officer picks it up, reads the next section. In several instances, parents were observed killing their children before jumping themselves. Methods included, he stops, puts the paper down. I cannot read this. Admiral Toyota takes the report from him, forces himself to continue. Methods included strangulation, stabbing, and throwing children from the cliffs first. Estimated age of victims ranges from infants to elderly. Total civilian deaths estimated in the thousands. Someone in the room makes a sound, not quite a gasp. Something more broken. A staff officer speaks up. His voice is hollow. We told them this would happen. The others look at him. He continues. For years, since before the war began. We told Japanese civilians that Americans were barbarians, monsters, that they would rape women, torture prisoners, murder children. Another officer nods slowly. The posters, the radio broadcasts, the school lessons. We showed them photographs from Nanking, someone adds quietly, and told them Americans would do the same to Japanese families. The room fills with the weight of understanding. Their own propaganda, their own lies. Now coming back as mass death. General Anami speaks for the first time in hours. If this happens on Saipan, he says slowly, what happens when they reach Okinawa, Kyushu, Honshu itself? Nobody answers. Because they're all doing the same terrible calculation. Saipan had roughly 20,000 civilians. If 40% died, many by suicide, that's 8,000 deaths. Okinawa has 400,000 civilians. The home islands? Tens of millions. More reports arrive throughout the day, each one worse than the last. Admiral Toyota tries to read another dispatch. This one from a submarine that surfaced briefly near the northern coast, witnessed approximately 200 civilians at location now designated Banzai Cliff, entire families. They were singing the national anthem. Then, one by one, his voice cracks, actually breaks. This is Admiral Toyota, a man who sent thousands of sailors to die without hesitation, who ordered kamikaze attacks, who planned operations knowing they would end in massacre. But this is different. These are civilians, children, dying because of words his government spoke. He sets the report down, removes his cap, covers his face with one hand. The other officers look away, give him privacy in his grief. The propaganda began years before the war. In schools, children learned that Western nations were cruel, heartless, that they saw Asian people as subhuman. Posters showed American and British soldiers as demons, literally depicted with horns and fangs. When war came, the messaging intensified. Radio broadcasts told civilians that capture meant torture, that Americans would desecrate shrines, violate women, kill children for sport. Pamphlets distributed to soldiers and civilians alike. Death before dishonor. Death before capture. The message was clear and constant. Surrender was worse than death. And the civilians of Saipan believed it so completely that mothers killed their own children rather than let Americans capture them. Believed it so thoroughly that entire families chose death together over the possibility of survival. The propaganda worked perfectly, too perfectly. As evening falls, senior officers gather to discuss what this means. Some argue they must revise the messaging, tell civilians that surrender is acceptable, that Americans will treat prisoners humanely. Others insist this would be catastrophic. It would undermine military morale, encourage defeatism, lead to mass surrenders. One general puts it bluntly, if we tell civilians they can surrender, our soldiers will too. The entire defense will collapse. But another counters, if we don't change the message, we're guaranteeing mass civilian death when the Americans reach the home islands. The debate circles, no resolution emerges. Finally, a senior staff officer makes a grim observation. Perhaps, he says quietly, the question is not whether civilians die, but how they die. If Saipan is any indication, many will choose death regardless of what we tell them now. The words hang heavy, because he's right. Years of propaganda cannot be undone with a single announcement. The fear has taken root too deeply. General Anami stands at the window as darkness falls. He's imagining the future. Can't help it. American forces landing on Kyushu, the southernmost home island. Civilians fleeing inland. But where can they go? The island is only so large. As Americans advance, what will those civilians do? He sees it in his mind. Families on mountaintops, civilians in caves, all of them facing the same choice the Saipan civilians faced, surrender or die. And after years of being told that surrender means torture and death, what will they choose? He thinks of his own family, his wife, his children. Would they jump from a cliff rather than face American soldiers? Would he want them to? The question makes him feel sick. Behind him, another officer is reading another report. More details from Saipan, more deaths. The numbers keep climbing. 1,000 confirmed civilian deaths, 1,500, 2,000. And this is just one island. One small island with 20,000 civilians. What happens when there are millions? The last report of the day sits on the conference table. Nobody wants to read it. It contains eyewitness accounts, specific descriptions, names of families who died together. One officer finally picks it up, scans it briefly, sets it back down. "We did this," he says quietly. Another officer starts to protest. The Americans, no. The first officer cuts him off. "We did this. Our words, our propaganda. We convinced them that death was better than capture, and they believed us." The room falls silent again. Outside, Tokyo continues its evening. Shops closing, families eating dinner, children doing homework, all of them unaware that their government is debating whether to tell them the truth, whether to prepare them for what's coming, or whether to let them believe just a little longer that they're safe, that the enemy is far away, that death is something that happens to soldiers on distant islands. Not to families at home, not yet. A smaller conference room, late evening, maps cover the entire table, charts, intelligence reports, technical specifications for American aircraft. 6 officers sit around the table, not the generals and admirals from earlier. These are technical staff, planning officers, men who deal in numbers and distances and payload capacities. They've been ordered to answer a simple question. What can the Americans do now that they have Saipan? The answer terrifies them. A staff colonel spreads out a large map of the Pacific. Japan sits on the left edge, the Mariana Islands on the right. He picks up a compass, the kind used for drawing circles. Range of the B-29 Superfortress, he says, placing the compass point on Saipan, fully loaded with incendiary bombs. 1,600 miles. He draws a circle. The arc sweeps across the map, encompasses Tokyo, Yokohama, Nagoya, even reaches toward Osaka and Kobe, every major city in Japan, every industrial center, every population hub. One of the other officers leans forward, measures the distance with his fingers. Tokyo, 1,500 miles, well within range. Osaka, 1,700 miles. He pauses. They could reach it with a lighter bomb load. The colonel draws another circle, centered on Tinian, the island next to Saipan that will inevitably fall next. The circles overlap, cover even more of Japan. A third officer pulls out another document, American construction projections. Intelligence from operatives in the United States. He reads aloud, his voice flat. Current B-29 production rate, approximately 160 aircraft per month. Projected increase by early 1945, 200 per month. Someone does the math quietly. That's more than 1,000 heavy bombers by spring, all capable of reaching Japan from the Marianas. A Navy Air Staff officer speaks up. We should consider the construction of Japanese cities. The others look at him. He continues carefully. European cities are largely stone and brick, concrete. They can withstand some level of bombing. But Japanese cities? He doesn't need to finish. They all know. Tokyo is wood and paper, tightly packed wooden houses, narrow streets, centuries-old construction methods designed for earthquakes, not bombs. An army officer adds grimly, we've seen the intelligence reports from Hamburg, Dresden. What incendiary bombs did to those cities? They all have. Seen the photographs, read the casualty estimates. Hamburg, 40,000 dead in a single raid. The firestorm reached temperatures hot enough to melt glass. Dresden, Estimates ranging from 25,000 to over 100,000 killed. Those were European cities, stone and brick. What happens when incendiary bombs fall on wood in Tokyo? Nobody wants to say it out loud. Another officer pulls out a folder marked with red security seals. Intelligence summary, updated weekly. American industrial production, he announces. Latest figures. He reads down the list. Aircraft carriers, one Essex-class carrier completed every month, every single month. Heavy bombers, one B-29 completed every hour. Fighter aircraft, one completed every 5 minutes. He sets down the report, looks around the table. How do we fight this? How does anyone fight this? Japan's entire industrial output for a year equals what America produces in weeks, maybe days for some categories. One officer tries to find hope. Our pilots are skilled. Our soldiers are brave. Spirit can overcome? He trails off. Even he doesn't believe it. Spirit doesn't stop 1,000 bombers. Bravery doesn't shoot down aircraft flying at 30,000 feet. Courage doesn't rebuild a carrier fleet that's already at the bottom of the ocean. The numbers are absolute, merciless. America can afford to lose 10 aircraft for every one Japan shoots down and still win by sheer weight of production. An air defense officer sits quietly, staring at the map. The others notice he hasn't spoken. What are you thinking? Someone asks. The officer looks up. His eyes are distant. I'm thinking about my family, he says softly. My wife and children. They live in Asakusa, wooden neighborhood, narrow streets. He traces a finger across the Tokyo section of the map. When the bombers come, and they will come, what happens to them? Where do they run? The question hangs in the air. He continues, almost to himself. The bombs fall, create fires, multiple fires. In wooden neighborhoods, the fires spread, merge together, create a firestorm like Hamburg. His voice drops to a whisper. The streets fill with smoke. The heat becomes unbearable. People run toward the rivers, but everyone else is running too. Thousands, tens of thousands, all trying to escape the same fire. He stops, closes his eyes. Another officer reaches across, places a hand on his shoulder. Nobody tells him he's wrong. Nobody offers false comfort. Because they're all imagining the same thing now. Their own families, their own neighborhoods, running through fire. The senior officer at the meeting pulls out a blank report form. We need to document our findings, he says. For the record. He begins writing. His handwriting is precise, careful. Assessment. Range capabilities of B-29 operations from Mariana Islands. He pauses, then continues. Conclusion. All major Japanese cities now within effective bombing range. Sustained strategic bombing campaign against home islands is now operationally feasible for American forces. Another pause. The pen hovers over the paper. Expected outcome. Significant destruction of urban areas. Massive civilian casualties. Disruption of industrial production. Collapse of civil defense capabilities. He sets down the pen, looks at what he's written. It's all there. The truth they've calculated. The future they can see coming. He picks up the pen again, adds one final line. The destruction of the home islands is now possible, not probable, not inevitable, just possible. But everyone in the room knows it's more than possible. It's coming. As the meeting ends, two officers stand at the window, looking out over Tokyo. The city sprawls below them, lights beginning to flicker on as evening deepens. Millions of people going about their lives. If they reach us, one officer whispers, our cities will burn. The other doesn't respond, just nods slowly. They both imagine it, can't help imagining it. The sirens wailing, the searchlights sweeping the sky, the distant drone of engines growing louder, then the bombs falling. Thousands of incendiary bombs, each one designed to start fires. And in a city of wood and paper, how many fires would it take? 10? 100? 1,000? The answer, not many. Not many at all. One of the officers speaks again. When do you think it will start? Months. The other replies, maybe weeks if they move quickly. The Americans are efficient. So we have time to prepare, to evacuate civilians, to build shelters. A pause. Prepare how? Where would they go? There are millions of people in Tokyo alone. You can't evacuate millions. And shelters don't stop firestorms. The first officer nods. Understands. They're not preparing for survival. They're preparing for loss. Calculating how many will die. Not if they'll die. The maps stay spread on the table after everyone leaves, circles drawn around Japanese cities, calculations scrawled in the margins. Distance, payload, bomb capacity. All the numbers that add up to one conclusion. Saipan didn't just fall, it opened a door, and through that door eventually will come fire. The only question left is when, and how many will burn before it ends. The palace corridors echo with whispered conversations. Elder statesmen move between meetings like shadows, former prime ministers, senior advisors, men who've served the throne for decades. They all carry the same message: Tojo must go. Behind closed doors, the Jushin meet without the prime minister present. This is highly irregular, but these are irregular times. Prince Konoe speaks first. His voice carries the weight of aristocratic authority. The loss of Saipan cannot be separated from the leadership that permitted it. The people will demand accountability. Another elder statesman nods. The military assured us the Marianas would hold. They assured us the Navy would protect our defensive line. Both assurances prove false. A third adds quietly, and now Tokyo itself is vulnerable. When the bombs begin to fall, who will the people blame? The answer sits unspoken in the room. They'll blame Tojo, the general who led them into war, who promised victory, who told them the absolute national defense zone was unbreakable. But more importantly, they'll blame the emperor for keeping Tojo in power. That cannot be allowed. The imperial system must survive, even if Tojo does not. General Hideki, Tojo sits alone in his office, prime minister, army chief of staff, the most powerful man in Japan, and now, quite possibly, finished. He knows what's happening, knows the palace is turning against him, knows his political support is evaporating like morning mist. He thinks back through the decisions that led here. Pearl Harbor, he supported it, believed Japan could strike hard enough to force American negotiations. The Philippines, China, Burma, all those conquests that now seem hollow, overextended, impossible to defend. The decision to hold the Marianas at all costs, to commit the fleet, to promise the emperor that Saipan would not fall. Every decision seemed logical at the time, based on the information available, the calculations they had. But logic doesn't matter now. Saipan has fallen. The defensive line is broken. Tokyo is in range of American bombers, and someone must take responsibility. He stands, walks to the window, looks out over the city he can no longer protect. How did it come to this? The question has no good answer. July 17th, 1944. A messenger arrives at Tojo's office. The emperor requests his presence. Tojo knows what this means. Palace protocol is precise. The phrasing of the summons tells him everything. This is not a consultation, not a request for advice. This is the end. He dresses carefully, full uniform, every decoration in place. If this is his final meeting as prime minister, he will at least look the part. The drive to the palace is short, silent. He's escorted through familiar corridors, has walked these halls hundreds of times. But today they feel different, colder. The chamberlain announces him. He enters. Emperor Hirohito sits in formal position. His expression is neutral, impossible to read. Tojo bows deeply. Hirohito speaks in the formal court language, polite, distant, General Tojo. We have considered recent developments in the Pacific campaign. Tojo remains bowed. Yes, Your Majesty. The loss of Saipan presents significant challenges to our strategic position, to the security of the home islands. Yes, Your Majesty. A pause, long enough to be uncomfortable. We believe it may be appropriate to consider changes in the government structure to better address these new circumstances. There it is, wrapped in palace formality, but the message is clear. Tojo straightens, meets the emperor's eyes for just a moment. I understand, Your Majesty. I will submit my resignation immediately. Hirohito nods slightly. That would be appropriate. Nothing else needs to be said. The emperor doesn't criticize, doesn't assign blame, doesn't need to. The summons itself is the judgment. Tojo bows again. Withdraws backward from the room. Proper protocol maintained to the very end. July 18th, 1944. The newspapers receive the official statement. Prime Minister Tojo has resigned. His entire cabinet will step down. The public reads it over breakfast. Some are shocked. Others expected it. But inside government circles, panic ripples through every ministry. If Tojo can fall, anyone can fall. The general who led Japan into war, who dominated the government for 3 years, who seemed untouchable, gone in days after Saipan fell. What does that say about the state of the war? Elder statesmen scramble to form a new government. They need someone acceptable to both the army and the emperor, someone who can maintain order, rally morale, someone willing to take responsibility for what's coming. The list of candidates is short, very short. Most qualified men want nothing to do with leading Japan at this moment. They can see the trajectory, the inevitable end. Finally, they settle on General Kuniaki Koiso, an army general, not brilliant, but steady, acceptable. Koiso accepts reluctantly. He knows this is a poisoned chalice. He forms his cabinet quickly, tries to project confidence, unity, determination, but everyone in the government knows the truth. This isn't a new beginning. It's damage control, rearranging furniture in a house that's already burning. Tojo's last day at Imperial headquarters. He arrives to collect his personal effects, documents, files, the accumulated materials of 3 years in power. The corridors are unusually quiet as he walks through. Officers turn away, pretend to study papers, find urgent business elsewhere. Nobody meets his eyes. Not out of disrespect exactly, but out of something worse, pity mixed with fear. If Tojo can fall this far this fast, what does it mean for the rest of them? A young staff officer does bow as Tojo passes. Tojo nods in acknowledgement. The gesture feels hollow, a formality between strangers. He reaches his former office. The door already bears someone else's nameplate. That was fast. He collects the last of his belongings, looks around the room one final time. How many decisions were made here? How many orders sent? How many men's fates sealed? All of it leading to this moment, walking out in disgrace. News of Tojo's fall reaches the front lines within days. Soldiers in Burma hear it. Sailors on the few remaining ships. Pilots in the air groups. The reactions vary. Some feel vindicated. Tojo promised them support that never came, reinforcements that never arrived, victory that never materialized. Others feel abandoned. If the leadership is changing this quickly, what does it say about their chances? But the most common reaction is simpler: fear. If even Tojo couldn't save them, who can? In a small restaurant in Tokyo, 3 officers meet for drinks after duty. They're careful with their words. Walls have ears, but the sake loosens tongue slightly. Tojo's resignation, one says quietly. What do you think it means? The second officer swirls his cup. Means Saipan was worse than they told us. The third adds, means they know we can't win. Silence. Then the first officer speaks again, barely above a whisper. So what do we do now? The question has no answer. Keep fighting. Keep following orders. Keep pretending that victory is possible, even though Tojo's fall just confirmed what they all suspected. The war is lost. It's just a matter of time now. Tojo arrives home that evening. His wife greets him at the door. She says nothing, just bows slightly, offers tea. He sits in his study, the same study where he planned campaigns, made decisions, believed he was serving the empire. Outside, Tokyo continues its evening routine. People shopping, children playing, life continuing. They don't know yet what his fall really means. Don't know that the loss of Saipan was so catastrophic it brought down the government. Don't know that American bombers will soon be coming. Don't know that the war they've been told Japan is winning is actually already lost. Tojo does know, has known since that silent conference room. That telegram from Saipan, he just couldn't admit it publicly. Now he doesn't have to. Someone else gets to carry that burden. Someone else gets to lead Japan through the fire that's coming. He almost feels relieved. Almost. November 24th, 1944, 4 months after Saipan fell. The air raid sirens begin wailing at 1:30 in the afternoon. This isn't unusual anymore. False alarms have become common as radar operators grow jumpy. Civilian planes mistaken for bombers. Shadows on screens that turn out to be nothing. But this time is different. Officers gather on the roof of Imperial headquarters, scanning the sky. One of them is the same staff officer who pulled the pin from the map back in July, who drew the circle showing Tokyo within range. He knew this day would come. They all did. But knowing and experiencing are different things. The sound reaches them first. A deep droning, growing louder, then someone spots them. There, high altitude, coming from the east, silver specks against the gray sky, flying information, B-29 super fortresses, just as predicted, just as calculated, flying from Saipan, 1,500 miles across the Pacific, carrying tons of bombs. The officer who drew that circle 4 months ago watches in silence. The terrible math made real. The first bombs fall on the Musashino aircraft factory. The Nakajima engine plant. The explosions are distant, muffled by distance, but visible as columns of smoke rising above the city. This first raid is small, only about 100 aircraft. The damage is limited, scattered, but everyone watching from that rooftop knows what this means. This isn't the raid. This is the first raid. A demonstration, a warning, a promise of what's coming. Vice Admiral Miwa stands beside the staff officer, the same admiral who whispered back in July, "Our war was lost with the loss of Saipan." He was right. The bombers prove it, flying overhead with impunity. Japan's air defenses barely scratch them. A few interceptors scramble, manage to shoot down one, maybe two bombers, but the rest complete their mission and turn back toward the Marianas. They'll be back tomorrow, or next week, or next month, and there's nothing Japan can do to stop them. Even before the first bombs fell, the government knew what was coming. In June 1944, while Saipan still fought, they drafted the outline for the evacuation of school children. Now, throughout autumn and winter, that plan becomes reality. Train stations fill with children, hundreds of thousands of them, tagged with labels showing their names and destinations. Rural villages, mountain towns, anywhere away from the cities. Mothers say goodbye to 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds. Children too young to understand why they're being sent away. The government calls it a precaution. Temporary, for the safety. But the mothers know, the fathers know, the children are being evacuated because Tokyo is going to burn. An officer watches a group of school children board a train, his own daughter among them. She waves from the window. He waves back, wonders if he'll see her again. Wonders if the rural village she's going to will be safe enough when the Americans decide to bomb everywhere. December 1944, more raids. January 1945, heavier raids. February, the attacks intensify. Not just Tokyo anymore. Nagoya, Osaka, Kobe, every major city. The B-29s come in waves now. Dozens, then hundreds. They fly at night. High altitude during the day. Low altitude bombing runs at dusk. Japan's air defenses crumble. Fighter pilots run out of fuel. Anti-aircraft guns run out of ammunition. The fires spread. In headquarters, officers track the damage on maps. Colored pins showing which neighborhoods burned, which factories destroyed, which areas still standing. Each day, more pins, more fire, more destruction. The staff officer who drew the original circle updates it constantly. Adds new airfields in the Marianas. Tinian now operational. Guam contributing bombers. The circles overlap, cover all of Japan. Nowhere is safe anymore. March 9th, 1945. The sirens begin just after midnight. Officers in headquarters check the radar reports. Their faces go pale. "How many?" someone asks. The radar operator rechecks. Over 300 aircraft, maybe more, all heading for Tokyo. This is different. Bigger than anything before. The B-29s come in low this time, under 10,000 feet, easier for anti-aircraft fire to reach. But they're carrying something different too. Incendiary bombs, thousands of them, designed specifically for wooden cities. The first bombs fall in a grid pattern across eastern Tokyo. Asakusa, Fukagawa, Sumida, working-class neighborhoods. Densely packed, wooden houses pressed together, perfect kindling. Within 30 minutes, the individual fires merge. Officers watch from miles away, see the glow on the horizon growing brighter. Orange, then red, then almost white. Reports filter in through the night, wind speeds increasing, the fire creating its own weather system, superheated air rising, pulling in cooler air from the sides. Temperature estimates 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit. Hot enough to boil rivers, people fleeing toward the Sumida River. Thousands of them, jumping in to escape the heat. Many drowning. Others boiled alive as the water temperature rises, the roads melting, asphalt turning liquid, people trapped, stuck in place as the fire advances. An officer tries to read the reports aloud. His voice keeps breaking. Estimated casualties, tens of thousands, maybe more. The fire is still burning. Nobody knows how to stop it. Fire brigades can't get close. Water pressure fails as pipes melt. All they can do is watch Tokyo burn. Dawn breaks over a transformed city. 16 square miles of Tokyo simply gone, reduced to ash and twisted metal. The staff officer goes to the rooftop again, looks toward the eastern districts, nothing but smoke, thick, black, blocking out the sun. Early estimates suggest 100,000 dead, maybe more, in a single night, more than died at Hiroshima later, more than any single bombing raid in history. Vice Admiral Miwa joins him on the roof, both men silent. Finally, the Admiral speaks. His voice is hollow. Saipan was the beginning of the end. This is what that beginning looks like. The staff officer nods, remembers that July day, the telegram, the silence in the conference room. Everything they feared then is happening now. The circle he drew on the map, the calculations about range and payload, the predictions about firestorms in wooden cities. All of it coming true, worse than they imagined. More raids follow Operation Meeting House. Osaka burns, Nagoya burns, Kobe burns, city after city, week after week. American bombers from Saipan, Tinian, Guam, the Marianas that Japan promised to hold, the islands they swore were unbreakable. In a small office, an officer pulls out Colonel Matsutani's report from July 1944, the one that concluded the loss of Saipan has destroyed all realistic hope of victory. He reads it again, sees how accurate it was, everything predicted, everything confirmed, the home islands bombable, cities destroyed, civilians dying by the hundreds of thousands, the war lost, just a matter of time until surrender. Matsutani saw it all in July, before the first bomb fell, just by looking at a map, doing the math, understanding what Saipan's fall truly meant. On another rooftop, different officers watch another raid. One of them was in that conference room in July. Heard the telegram read aloud, witnessed the silence. We knew, he says quietly. We knew this was coming. His companion nods. We did the calculations, drew the circles, understood the range. So why didn't we stop it? The question has no good answer. Stop it how? Surrender in July? The military would never allow it. The people weren't ready, so we waited. And now Tokyo burns. They watch the fires in silence, thinking about that July day, the telegram from Saipan, the moment they understood. Everything after that was just waiting for the inevitable, waiting for the prophecy to fulfill itself, waiting for the circle on the map to become fire in the sky. And now it has. The B-29s returned to their bases in the Marianas, Saipan, Tinian, Guam, the islands that were supposed to be defended, that Japan swore would never fall, the islands that fell anyway. And from those islands, night after night, the bombers rise, fly 1,500 miles across the Pacific, drop their fire on Japanese cities, and return home safely, just as predicted, just as calculated, just as everyone in that silent conference room knew would happen. The day Saipan fell, August 1945, the same conference room, the same maps on the walls, the same men, though they look decades older than they did 13 months ago. But this time, they're not discussing how to fight. They're discussing whether to surrender. 2 atomic bombs have fallen. Hiroshima on August 6th, Nagasaki on August 9th. The Soviet Union has entered the war, invading Manchuria with overwhelming force. Japan's last hope of negotiating through Moscow is gone. The Supreme War Council meets in emergency session. Generals, admirals, cabinet ministers, all gathered to decide Japan's fate. The debate is bitter. General Anami stands to speak. His voice is firm, but there's desperation underneath. We still have millions of soldiers. The home islands can be defended. We can make the Americans pay such a price that they'll negotiate rather than invade. He's talking about Operation Ketsugo, the plan for defending Japan itself. Every civilian armed, every beach fortified, suicide attacks on landing craft, millions of Japanese deaths. But perhaps, he argues, it would force America to accept terms. Another general supports him. We cannot surrender unconditionally. The Kokutai must be preserved. The emperor must remain. If we fight hard enough, we can demand this. But Navy Minister Yonai shakes his head. Fight with what? Our navy is destroyed. Our air force exists only on paper. Our cities are ash. Our people are starving. He pauses, looks around the table. How many more must die before we admit what we've known for a year? The room goes silent. Because everyone knows what he means, Vice Admiral Miwa speaks up, his voice quiet but clear. I said in July of last year that our war was lost with the loss of Saipan. Nothing since then has changed that assessment. We have merely confirmed it with blood and fire. Other officers nod slowly. Some who were in that conference room 13 months ago, they remember the telegram, the silence, the terrible calculations about bombers and range. Everything they feared has happened. Cities burned, civilians dead, the home islands invaded from the air. The only difference between then and now is that the truth can finally be spoken aloud. General Anami tries again. But surrender means occupation, trials, the destruction of everything we fought to preserve. Foreign Minister Togo responds. Continuing means the destruction of the Japanese people themselves. Which matters more, preserving our pride or preserving our nation? The argument circles, intensifies, voices rise, hours pass, no consensus emerges. Some still demand to fight, others insist surrender is the only option. Finally, someone suggests the unthinkable. We must ask the emperor to decide. Emperor Hirohito enters the room. Everyone stands, bows deeply. He sits, listens to the arguments presented one final time. The proponents of fighting speak passionately about honor and resistance. The proponents of surrender speak grimly about reality and survival. When they finish, silence fills the room. Hirohito speaks. His voice is soft but steady. I have listened carefully to all opinions. I have considered the alternatives. I understand the desire to continue fighting. He pauses. But I cannot bear to see my people suffer any longer. The continuation of the war promises only their annihilation. Cities destroyed. Families scattered. The nation itself at risk of extinction. Another pause. Longer this time. We must endure the unendurable. Bear the unbearable. We must accept the Allied terms and end this war. Several officers bow their heads. Some close their eyes. General Anami sits frozen. His face gray. The decision is made. Japan will surrender. After the meeting ends, a few officers remain. The same staff officer who drew the circle on the map back in July 1944. Vice Admiral Miwa. A handful of others who were there that day. They stand around the map table, looking at the Pacific. American flags mark the conquered territories now. The Philippines recaptured. Okinawa taken. The Marianas firmly under U.S. control. The red strings that once connected Tokyo to distant islands are long gone. One officer speaks quietly. We knew. That day in July, when Saipan fell, we knew it would end like this. Miwa nods. The calculations were clear. The range, the bombers, Tokyo within reach. Victory impossible. So why did we keep fighting? The staff officer asks. Nobody has a good answer. Pride, fear, momentum. The inability to admit defeat while there were still soldiers alive to fight. All inadequate reasons. But all true, another officer adds. Perhaps we hoped something would change, that America would grow tired, that we could negotiate from a better position. But nothing changed. America only grew stronger. Japan only grew weaker. The circle the staff officer drew 13 months ago still shows on the map. Faded now, but still visible. 1,500 miles from Saipan to Tokyo. The distance that doomed an empire. Days later, after the surrender announcement, the conference room sits empty. One admiral returns, an old man now, bent by age and defeat. He's the same officer who sat in this room in July 1944, who read the telegram about Saipan, who watched the silence stretch. He walks to the map, runs his finger along the line from the Marianas to Japan. A young aide enters, bows, asks if the admiral needs anything. The admiral doesn't turn around, just keeps looking at the map. When we lost Saipan, he says quietly, we lost the war. The rest was only living through the consequences. The aide says nothing, too young to have been there, too young to remember what it felt like before everything fell apart. The admiral continues, almost to himself. We knew that day, knew it in our bones. The math was simple, the conclusion inevitable. He finally turns from the map. But knowing and accepting are different things. So we fought on, sacrificed millions, burned our cities, killed our people, all while knowing how it would end. He walks toward the door, stops. History will judge us harshly, and it should. We saw the truth in July 944 and chose to ignore it for 13 more months. The aide bows as the admiral leaves. The room falls silent again. In homes across Japan, families gather around radios. August 15th, 1945, noon. Emperor Hirohito's voice, thin and crackling through static, announces the surrender. The war is over. In a small apartment in what remains of Tokyo, the staff officer who drew the circle listens with his family. His daughter, evacuated in 1944, has returned home, thin, quiet, changed by what she saw. When the broadcast ends, she asks, "Father, when did we lose?" He looks at her, thinks about that July day, the telegram, the silence. "We lost when Saipan fell," he says quietly. "Everything after was just waiting for the end to catch up with us." She doesn't fully understand. How could she? She was just a child then, but someday when she's older, when she studies the history, she'll read about Saipan. She'll see the maps, the distances, the calculations about bombers and range, and she'll understand what her father meant. That wars aren't only lost in the final battle. Sometimes they're lost in a single moment, a single island, a single telegram, and everything after is just the working out of that loss. Years later, historians will walk through Imperial headquarters. They'll stand in that conference room, look at the maps still hanging on the walls. They'll ask, when did Japan really lose World War II? Some will say Midway, others will say Guadalcanal. A few will point to Pearl Harbor itself, the moment Japan guaranteed American entry and eventual industrial dominance. But those who study the internal documents will find a different answer. They'll read Colonel Matsutani's July 1944 report, "The loss of Saipan has destroyed all realistic hope of victory." They'll find Vice Admiral Miwa's post-war testimony, "Our war was lost with the loss of Saipan." They'll see Admiral Nagano's grim assessment, "When we lost Saipan, hell was on us," and they'll understand. The war ended in August 1945, but it was lost in July 1944 in a silent conference room in Tokyo, the moment a telegram announced that Saipan had fallen. Everything after was just the inevitable unfolding of that truth. The bombers, the fires, the atomic bombs, the surrender, all of it visible if you knew where to look in that moment of silence, when the pin came out of the map, when the circle was drawn. When they calculated the distance and understood 1,500 miles, the distance between an island and an empire's end. If you enjoyed this story, hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you never miss the next one.